Hi, my name is Nikki Seward, and it is May 18th, 2014, and this short video is provided for the people of the North Delta CARES and anyone who is interested in issues of water flow. This is specific to the Sacramento River and its tributaries, and this particular video presents one of my questions regarding the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and this has to do with the water flow and whether it is tunnels or surface conveyance or any kind of exporting from the Delta, from specifically the Sacramento River. It all depends on flow and reports, and if you can't correctly count it, you can't correctly report it, and you also can't correctly manage it. And then the outcomes, such as salinity encroachment, that's terrible for the Delta. That's what happens when you can't count it, you can't manage it, and you still allow huge exports. So this question I have for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan decision makers is, do the flow reports, graphics, and outcomes include or account for the flow data gaps as established from just a 2-week review of flow data for the North Delta waterways? And if not, doesn't that indicate the baseline computer modeling for flow and impacts of the North Delta must be wrong in the Bay Delta Conservation Plan? I am, in particular, I'm going to go to one, let me go find that one. No, there we go. Okay, Bay Delta Conservation Plan. This is Environmental Impact Statement for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, Appendix 5A. This is regarding water quality, salinity, and all that in Chapter 5. And the importance of sufficient water flow on the Sacramento River is very obvious. We want to keep the salinity out. And there was some computer modeling done. Group RMA was one of them, and here is a graphic actually from the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, but they had the results on different pages, so I did screen prints of each one. So this is Steamboat Slough, this is Bacon Island, this is this location right here, Sacramento at Rio Vista, and this was their predicted salinity impacts. All of this computer modeling depends on correct water flow calculations, knowing if what they're saying is flowing on the Sacramento River, and in this case the ship channel, and in the reservoir that is Liberty Island now, and everything, all the factors in here. If they have anything incorrect, it will affect the outcome. So I'm going to show you some data gaps, and again, we all know it gets too salty if too much water is taken out. You hear about X2. X2 means double the salinity is allowed to encroach into the Delta than what was promised in the previous water plans. So that's one of the definitions that I read, and I thought that was interesting. It also, X2 is like the bottom of the waterway, the salinity level. It says, let's see, what is that? By definition, X2 is the distance in kilometers from the Golden Gate to the tidally average near bed 2 PSU isohane. That is a measure for the salinity, and they do it at the bottom of the bed. Now you got to recognize the Delta was always measured in parts per thousand chloride, so PPT. So there's another conversion issue that needs to be addressed. Anyway, I'm going to go back to my first, my question and my chart. I want you to look at these unexplained gaps in water flow data reporting for just 2 weeks in March 2014. This came from the CDEC website, and you can see the link down here. And I went through and looked at Freeport, Sutter Slough, Steamboat Slough, Georgiana Slough, and below Georgiana, because the Delta Cross Channel is closed right now, indefinitely, they say. or until further notice. So, in summary, I did this because U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was looking at the barriers issue, and of course I object to it. It would be a huge impact on Steamboat Slough, and they don't even know what flow the water is really flowing at because of these data gaps. So how can they make informed decisions when all they're given is false information? So basically, this review of the flow data from March 15th to 30th shows that important gaps in flow reporting online at CDEC, should be a C right there, website may indicate underreporting of both flow and experiments in process on Steamboat and Sutter Sloughs, and underreporting of diversions through Georgiana Slough. So, and I will go, that will be the next topic, is the underreporting of diversions from Georgiana Slough. This one is about the data gaps on Steamboat and Sutter Slough. My question is, since there was unreported flow or gaps in data at each of the CDEC monitoring stations of the North Delta that I reviewed, one should question if there are also gaps in data reporting for the earlier months. And is there actually more flow on the waterways than reported, or do the gaps hide experiments on the flow? So this is the summary page, and I actually will come back to this so you can see how I got to this before I go through the summary page. So the process is you go to the CDE website, you define a time frame that you want to get data from. Below the graphic, you go to the CDEC website, you pick, there's a map where you can see the different gauges in the delta. You pick one, like Freeport, you pick a time frame, and it'll give you a graphic, and I'll show you that. And then below that, you can click on links to just the raw flow data, which I did. And then you can look for not the summarized flow data, but the per hour, per day, every 15-minute interval. It's a 15-minute interval that's really important. So then, so here you go and you see this website, the CDEC, the Exchange Center, and you see that this is Sacramento River, for example, on March 26th. In 2014, and it shows the different examples. That's March 28th below, so you see what it looks like. And then this FTP data, so that's Freeport data, you get those numbers. And then I'm going past that. What you pull up is a chart that looks like this. You have to import this into Excel, and then review it really carefully, because when I imported Freeport, Sutter, Steamboat, Georgiana, and Lower Sacramento River gauges, my purpose in doing that was to look at the flow splits, because DWR and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan made a presumption of flow splits when there's 5,000 cubic feet per second on the Sacramento River. It's going to be split somewhat equally between Sutter, Steamboat, Georgiana, and Lower Sacramento River. But when you're on the river, you can see that's not true. You can just, and plus Georgiana is deeper than the other ones, so gravity flow takes the water down that way. So that just shows that their computer modeling regarding how the flow splits is incorrect. That alone, so I wanted to get the raw data to look at actual percentages. Well, what I found out, excuse me, is that there are gaps in the data. And as I've been talking, can you find the data gap here? Let's look at this. We go 12 o'clock. Now let's 10 o'clock. You'll see that the flow is reported in 15-minute intervals. Well, so you go to 9:45, 10, 10:15, 10:30, 10:45. Then all of 11 is gone. So from 11:45 to 12 noon, that's either 1 full hour or an hour and 15 minutes, there's a data gap there. And look what happens. The water flow drops drastically. In a 1 hour time, it goes down 6,000 cubic feet per second. Okay, this is a CF. That's huge. Water going down, tide going out. It's 1 foot per hour, maybe. If it's a really drastic tide, maybe a little bit more. It goes down 6 cubic feet per second. That's just such a drastic drop in 1 hour. And if you look at it in a 2 hour, 1.5 hour time span from 10:45 to 10:15 to 12:15, that's a 2 hour span. That dropped 9. You go from 10:15 to 12:45, and look at that. 2.5 hours, it's gone down 10,000 cubic feet per second. That's such an unnatural drop. And then you see this is a low tide area. That some experiment was going on there, and there's this data gap. And then what do we see at 12:45? It should say go to 1 and 125 and on from there. And we have this big gap right in here too. We should say I'm sorry, not 1. This is on military time, so it's 12:45. Then it should go to 13, 15, 13, 30, 13:45. Then it goes to 14. So we have another data gap. So what I found, and you have to, when you line these up, you start finding these data gaps. So I'm going back up to these data gap information. What I found on March 26, 2014, was that on Freeport, at the Freeport gauge, what I had to do actually is I made a generic chart first. This is in Excel, so that I could tell when I imported this stuff when there was data gaps, and then I would and so this is one of them. I found that at Freeport, starting right at 11 o'clock, it appeared on the 26th, there's missing data. And 15 minutes later, there's missing data. The gauge is just turned off, or they're withholding information on Steamboat Slough. So that 15 minutes probably represents water flow. It starts to affect downriver, probably in 15 minutes to half an hour intervals. And so they must have been conducting some sort of experiment in there that they don't want us to know about, or they don't want us to be able to use that data, because there are definitely impacts when Department of Water Resources or U.S. Bureau of Reclamation that are managing the reservoirs above us and managing Freeport, when they drop the water that fast, there are impacts. Their docks can break, boats can sink, as you can ask the people of at Cliffs Marina. It's just so drastic when water is dropped intentionally, and that's what it appears what was going on when you look at what the flow said on Steamboat Slough. When it got dropped up at Freeport, we were already experiencing low tide, and they made it a much lower tide. And since we're out there and we're seeing this, I think they're experimenting what if there was barriers or something like that. It was very drastic. We've been seeing the lowest water levels anybody has ever seen out there, and there have been people there since the 1940s that are still there. So we've got some longevity on Steamboat Slough. Must be the good water. Anyway. So I wanted you to see this data gap, so I'm going to go on to another one. So Freeport Steamboat again, you see another on the 20th. I saw that they did that again, and again we have a this drop though is it's like at high tide, and more normal flows of what they said is going to be on Sacramento River, and so I'm really interested in this because this is the type of time frame that would tell me what is the real percentage split between if you have 13,000 cubic feet per second on at Freeport on the Sacramento River, and over 3,000 goes into Sutter, and 4,000 into Steamboat, and then 2,000 into Georgiana. How is it that all of a sudden you have this much at that gauge below Georgiana? That's on the Sacramento River below Georgiana. The numbers didn't max up, so they didn't make sense. So that makes me question everything about the day flow thing. Not just that there's data gaps, but the numbers are not making a lot of sense. So like I said, can you find the data gap? I already showed you this one. Here's another one. Can you find the data gap? Maybe I showed you the last one. Let's see. That's a 26. Oh yeah. Okay, so that's at Freeport. This is the 26 at Steamboat, and like I said, you have to look really closely, and all of a sudden there's a gap right there. You go along, and there goes a 13, which is basically 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and there's a gap. So there is actually gaps in other areas. The gaps will kind of show up also in these little notches. Sometimes you can actually go through and say, wait a minute, that means there is more water, and this means there was probably less. That's supposedly reporting the lowest, and then you go and look and you find there might be a gap there. So in reviewing all of it, what I found was that if I just look at 2 weeks and I find data gaps, what was Bay Delta Conservation Plan based on? How many data gaps were there? What these data gaps tell us is, first of all, there was more flow on the river than what was accounted for. So when they did the summaries, which is what they do, they meaning CDEC, day flow, summarize these things and says there was X amount per month on this river, but did they know that there was data gaps? So were they underreporting the flow on those river? Were they over-reporting flow if, so for example, Georgiana shows this really high number in comparison on the flow splits, it doesn't quite seem possible. So were they over or under-reporting Georgiana? So in that one, I want to give a summary. Let's see. The Freeport data gap represented at least 8,000 cubic feet per second for a 3-hour span, which, you can calculate that out, and that is an amount of flow that is not accounted for here, and yet it really was flowing, because it's not really physically possible to just turn off the water like that. They may have some barrier that that is like rising and going back down, or they may have been testing Freeport pumps, which are then thereby able to pull a lot more water than people anticipated. I don't think they would have been doing that in the middle of the day, but who knows? All I know is there is 3 days worth of 8,210 cubic feet per second, possibly. That is a data gap for Freeport. On Sutter Slough, the data gap was on 318. On Steamboat Slough, we had data gap on 316, 320, 326, and another one on 326, and then another one on 327. So obviously they were really experimenting on Steamboat Slough. Georgiana had a data gap between 316 and 318, and then I have a whole other review of the April. I then went and looked at Georgiana in April, and that's a huge one. So below Georgiana Slough on the Sacramento River, there was data gaps on 318 and 328. All of this represents water flow that is not being accounted for. Thank you for listening. Oh, let's see if I had something else that I wanted to show you. Oh, just as a reminder, when they do these charts for us, this is the first chart giving delta outflow through to 2010, and this is their revised one. Look at my last talk on unaccounted for water flow. These are all based on the flow as reported by CDEC and USBR, or USGS, sorry. And these numbers are based on what I was just showing you, those numbers that have data gaps. So either chart they use, you have to really question the veracity of the product and the data they're providing us. And why is this all important? Well, the real obvious thing, I am again going back to salinity and impacts of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and all these CalFed actions that they've been doing and how it impacts us. If they started this computer modeling with incorrect flow data, then the outcome is also incorrect. For example, if there is an assumption of 10,000 cubic feet per second of flow on the Sacramento River that splits equally between Sutter Slough, Steamboat Slough, Georgiana, and Lower Sacramento, and in fact most of it goes into Georgiana, that drastically affects the salinity outcome computer modeling for Lower Sacramento River in this area, for Steamboat Slough, and for this area of Cache Slough. So this is very important. Why are those data gaps there? Who authorized those data gaps in experiments? And were they doing this before? Was it included in this computer modeling and the salinity impacts that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and conveyance plans are based upon? And exactly how much salinity are we going to get? 1 ppt, 0.5 ppt is historically the tops you can go for drinking water. The delta has always, prior to the HOX2 thing, the measure had always been 1 ppt, and they kept it below like 3 Mile Slough for sure. And now they're talking about increasing salinity in a huge area of the delta. That will destroy the farmlands. That will, they don't talk about what it does to the aquifer, and that you'd be scared if they're ignoring or not talking about the impact long term to the aquifer. If you don't have fresh water flushing out on the surface water, and the surface waters get salty, what do you think's happening in the aquifer? Aquifers tend to encroach further inland than the freshwater surface water does. So definitely ask those questions. What happens to the aquifer in the long term? Thank you for listening. This has been my summary on the data gaps on Steamboat Slough, Sutter Slough, and the Sacramento River at Freeport. Thank you.